Hey, Chad Carter here with chadcarter.net and learnhololens.com. And today I just want to go down memory lane for a little bit and talk about the .NET framework. So right now there's the .NET conference that's going on. It's a virtual conference, and if you've not been watching that, I suggest you do. I'll have a link to Channel 9 where you'll either be able to watch it live or watch the replays, depending on when you're watching this video. But I want to talk about the .NET framework and just my experience with it. And you can take it for what it is. And that is one person's experience with the framework over like a 17-year period now, just about 17 years. And you're like, well, the .NET framework's only been around for 15 years. Came out in 2002, Chad. Yeah, that's true. But I was using it in October of 2000. Back then, it was .NET. The actual framework, I don't even know I understood how the framework was split up at that point. All I knew was a thing called ASP+. That's what they were calling it on the front end of this, the web side. So in July of 2000, they announced ASP+. And that was in the PDC, Professional Developers Conference, in Orlando in 2000. I didn't go to that conference, but that's when I heard about it, was sometime after that conference. And I forget what the conference I went to, but I went to one in Las Vegas in 2000. I don't remember exactly when it was. It was sometime in August or September. And that's when I was able to kind of get my first peek at this thing called ASP+. And they had a example application called I Buy Spy. Buy as in B-U-I. And spy as in like they're selling spy equipment. And this is the first time I saw Scott Guthrie. And Scott Guthrie is now a red polo shirt fame, and he was wearing a red polo shirt that day. So when he speaks, if you don't know, when he speaks publicly, he's always make sure he has a red polo shirt on. It's kind of like a good luck thing for him, I think. But now he's I don't know his exact title at Microsoft, but he's pretty high up on the chain there. So definitely a vice president or executive. I mean, again, I don't know the actual titles there at Microsoft on the higher ups, but yeah, I think he reports directly to Satya. So he's kind of over all of Azure now and everything else. So it's been pretty awesome as a developer throughout the years to watch him when he kind of was talking about ASP+ and this thing that because he kind of did the original prototype of that over a short period of time. I forget how many days it was, but it was days, not weeks, that he took some ideas that people were talking about then, and he kind of went and made this prototype, and then of course then they made the actual final product, I'm sure from other code. I don't know that, but either way, but it's pretty awesome to see someone who had that kind of a background as a regular developer, if you will, to now be one of the head honchos there at Microsoft. It's pretty awesome. And he's a great guy too. I've met him and talked to him a couple times and heard him talk a lot of times, and he's a nice guy. But here I am in Las Vegas at this conference, and I wish I could remember the name of it. So if you happen to know what that is, then by all means leave me a comment and let me know. I'd love to know what that name of that conference was, because I don't remember. For a while I thought maybe it was the Professional Developers Conference. I remember, no, that was the one that was in July down in Orlando. So either way, I digress. At the time, I had just started working with a company. I came work for the company in March of 2000, and they had been working. They didn't have any kind of development staff or whatever, but they'd been outsourcing a lot of development. They had a lot of clients and some big name clients, and they were doing e-commerce because they were fulfilling different types of products, promotional products mainly, out of the warehouse for their clients, and they're providing these e-commerce services for their clients. So they would do the whole, let me pull up an e-commerce store for you, and then we'll fulfill the stuff out of our warehouse. Well, so the company was actually outsourcing all the development to a different company and was spending bukus of money doing so. And they had also, before I came, they implemented an ERP system, but it wasn't implemented right, and it was costing them all kinds of issues, and costing them a lot of money in the process. But all this development work they had done by this outside firm was all sitting on top of that ERP system. So I was tasked with creating something, figuring out a solution that we could get off the ERP system, get off of the e-commerce that was sitting on top of that, and make something that we could support the clients going forward. Ended up that if we got off that ERP system by the end of the year, so by January 1st, then we would get so much money back from purchasing that ERP system. And then if we got totally off by June or whatever, we would get the rest of the money back or something. I forget exactly what the deal was now, but there was an incentive to hit a particular mark by January 1, and then by June to get totally off of that system altogether. So this was sometime after July, after PDC, I heard about this thing called ASP Plus, and then sometime in either August, September, I went to this conference, and it could have even been early October, but I don't think it was that late. And that's when I saw iBuySpy. And again, it was an e-commerce demo using this really awesome programming model, which I was used to with my background being in Windows development, and you doing like WinForms things where you bring up a button and you double click on the button, and there's your code for when you click on the button. Here's the code you want to run. And that event model was just it's a great model I was very used to. And so while the original e-commerce systems that was out there that the other company had built, it was all ASP, and so regular ASP 3.0 and COM objects. And so I could have tried to go down that path of doing ASP and COM, but this whole new world of .NET is like, wow, again, I don't even think they were calling it .NET at the time. I know ASP was just simply ASP Plus, and I don't think that I even understood there was this whole framework underneath. Okay, I don't believe that was really solidified either in the conversation. I just didn't realize it at the time. Now, shortly thereafter, sometime in 2001 and 2002, that's when everything from a marketing and branding perspective of Microsoft, everything was .NET. So you had Windows Server.NET coming out, and then you had Visual Studio.NET, and then of course you had the .NET framework with ASP.NET. So .NET kind of became more than really what it should have from a marketing standpoint, but they got their name out, so that was kind of good from that standpoint. But here we are at this conference, and I'm awestruck by what I'm seeing, and I'm like, well, this is what we need to use. And but of course, there's no go live license. I mean, this is beta 1. This is actually, at this point, it was pre-beta. This was alpha bits of code here, but it was still light years ahead of ASP and COM from how fast you can get something done and how easy it was to actually debug the stuff and step it in the code. It was really, really slick, especially during that time. To do anything like that on the web was just unheard of. You could do some of these things in the Windows world, Windows development at the time, but you couldn't do it on the web. It was unheard of. So, spent my time digging into that, and there's no documentation, obviously, around that point. And since it was beta, there's no go live license. But I didn't care. I didn't really realize there was such a thing as a go live license back then, even though I found out later in beta 2, when beta 2 came out, and they said, okay, now you have a go live license, you can go live. And I'm thinking, right. So this whole time I've been live, probably I shouldn't have been. Yeah, but it is what it is. Because January 1 hit, and we converted our first clients. Now, we have 40 clients or so. We converted that first client over to this new system that was written using, by that point, I think it was beta 1 of ASP.NET. And then over the course of the next 6 months, we end up converting all the rest of them over to this. And by that point, I think we moved over from beta 1 to beta 2 at that point. I think. If not, it came, later. I know the release came out. There was a release candidate before, but the actual release was in February of 2002. So I was running the .NET framework and ASP.NET from January all the way up through the following February with over 40 clients at that time. And I think by the time that happened, we ended up getting like another 20-some clients. I think we had over 60 clients at that point within that first year of running on this ASP plus / ASP.NET system. And from October until January of 2000, I was working like a madman. I was putting in 100-hour weeks, and usually more than I was sleeping very little. And I'm actually surprised that my wife stuck with me during that time. She was kind of getting tired of not seeing me, and even though I was working out of my home, but I was just working nonstop, so I was kind of living at work, if you will. It ended up that, like I said, went live, everything worked out. The change from beta 1 to beta 2 was painful. Oh, that's painful. So many breaking changes, and so many things had to go on there and change. It was a painful experience. And then there was more breaking changes when we went from beta 2. I don't remember if it was going from beta 2 to the release candidate or from the release candidate to the final release, but there was another painful breaking changes, but nowhere near as bad as going from beta 1 to beta 2. But of course, that was my doings, because it is what it is. But so that was .NET 1.0, and then they released shortly after .NET 1.1, and then I forget exactly when .NET 2.0 came out. 2004 or 2005. And that's when I did a rewrite of that e-commerce system. It was in 2005, 2006 time frame. And that was all in the .NET 2.0. And so I've been working with the .NET framework for 17 years. And I really enjoyed it. Now, back when Ruby was getting really, really popular, there's a lot of people that jumped ship from the .NET framework and kind of went over to something else like Ruby. And while I dabbled in Ruby and dabbled in some other things, I still pretty much kept to .NET. And of course, they released the MVC framework for .NET. Then there's this whole alt.NET movement, and so I was kind of peeking in and looking at different things. But the vast majority of my time early on, especially on the web side, was still really ASP.NET web forms. Up until probably about 2010, 2011 is when I started fooling with MVC some. Even though that probably came out in 2009, I think MVC was I think getting going around then. But what's interesting to me now is that framework has been around solidly for 15 years, and some of us have been using it even longer than that. But over the last couple of years, there's been this offshoot of that. And originally it was going to be called ASP.NET 5, because I said like in 2005 or so, it went up to ASP.NET 2.0, then they went to 3.0 and 3.5, and then 4.0, and 4.5 is now we're on 4.6. 4.6.2, I believe. But it's 4.6 point whatever. And because ASP.NET Core was going to be called ASP.NET 5. But they started announcing this ASP.NET Core, and then .NET Core, and I ended up writing a couple of projects, a couple of apps that was using the .NET Core and ASP.NET Core in the 1.0 era. And they just released this past month ASP.NET Core 2.0. And they have created this whole thing called the .NET Standard recently. And it allows you to say, I expect these APIs to be present, and I can compile against those APIs. Now you still got to be a little careful to make sure that whatever you are deploying to, whatever your end result is, whether it's a Windows machine or a Mac or a Linux or whatever, that it actually has the APIs that you want. So you'll get a runtime error if it's not available on those. So it's still important to test that. But they did this so that this massive history of code that's out there for these last 15 years, that you can use those same APIs, all these libraries that are there's NuGet packages or whatever, that you can actually use them with your project. Now, while I've been talking about the .NET framework and ASP.NET, and now this ASP.NET Core and the .NET Framework Core, or .NET Core Framework, there was this whole other thing out there as well, and it was called Mono. Mono was an implementation of the .NET Framework that ran on Linux. And a fellow by the name of Miguel de Casa is the one who created that as an open source project. And it's pretty astounding that you're able to get the .NET Framework, that you write your C# code, that runs on top of the .NET Framework, and all of a sudden you could create iOS apps or things that run on Linux because of the work that was done in Mono. That was, he ended up working for Novell for a while, and then I think he left Novell, bought back the rights to Mono. I'm not exactly sure what all happened there, but either way, he retained the rights or bought the rights back or whatever to that. And then he started his own company, Miguel did, called Xamarin. And then this past year, Microsoft actually bought Xamarin. And once they did that, now we kind of had, well, before we kind of had this fractured .NET Framework ecosystem. But what Microsoft, when they bought Xamarin, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's going to be awesome because they're going to bring all this stuff together. And that's finally happening. So here we are with this .NET standard, and now you're seeing the convergence of Mono with the full-fledged .NET Framework with this .NET Core, because the .NET Core runs on Windows and it runs on Mac and it runs on Linux. Mono also ran on all three, and that's what Unity, the Unity game engine, a lot of my material here on this channel I talk about Mono, or I talk about Unity a lot, and Unity is using the Mono underneath. Now the latest versions of Unity, like the 2017.2, that's currently in beta as of this video, it has support for .NET Core, and actually some of the previous versions did as well. 2017 in general had support for .NET Core that you can just build directly to that. And so what this does is it opens up the game development now, that you can use these API. You can start using some of the more modern features of C# that you're kind of stuck to the .NET 3.5 time frame. And 3.5, that's 2007. That's 10 years ago. So this is pretty awesome in general, I think, for all developers, but especially for those who are fooling with Unity and working with Unity, because now there's these other packages that may have been too cumbersome to use behind the scenes in the past, that now are going to be able to be used because of the work that's been done in .NET Core. And I guess a whole other bit I didn't even talk about was when I was using XNA and C#, the .NET Framework and XNA to create games for the Xbox 360 and for Windows, and then for the Windows Phone. There's this whole thing about Silverlight that was around at during 2009, 10-ish, a little bit before, a little bit after. But yeah, so you had Silverlight that ran on the .NET Framework, and then you had Moonlight that ran on the Mono Framework, right? Or that was the idea anyway. So I don't remember a whole lot ever really coming out of Moonlight. Silverlight was pretty neat in what it did, in which case it was actually a web browser plugin that lets you create functionality that would run on Mac and Linux and everything else with the web browser. But right when it was getting its legs and starting to kind of beat out Flash, or not really beat out Flash, but at least starting to be a competitor to Flash, that's when Apple came out and said, yeah, we have this thing called the iPad, and we're not gonna support Flash on the iPad. And that pretty much spelled the end for Flash, and just kicked the legs out from underneath Silverlight before it was able to get going, really. So I just want to go to memory lane here and talk about the .NET framework, because of it kind of getting this new life. And this is going to be, look, the framework has been around for the last 15 plus years. Okay, so I'll say 17 years. I've been using it for that long, but it's been around officially for 15 plus years. .NET Core 2.0, like, it's mature now. It's there. Obviously, it still needs work. I'm not suggesting like there's no issues, but for all practical purposes, it's a mature product. It's ready for the big time, and the performance on the .NET Core is just light years ahead of what the .NET original framework was, and what many other competitors out there are. So the performance standpoint is fantastic, and all of a sudden there's a surge of energy where people are getting excited about .NET Core, who were either in the .NET framework before and left, and now they're coming back, or folks who had never even bothered this before just because of the performance reasons. So I know Unity was doing C# and they were using this Unity script, and now they're phasing out Unity script and only really focusing on C#, which makes a lot of sense to me. Now, I know there's folks who really like JavaScript. I like JavaScript. I've done a lot of development in JavaScript and in TypeScript, but I think it makes a lot of sense to just do focus on C#, because if you can do JavaScript development, you can do C# development. There's not, syntax is similar. You'll have to start casting things and boxing and unboxing, things of that nature maybe, but you'll be just fine. But C# is a fantastic language. It's funny, Java, its promise, what everybody thought was going to happen, was it was going to be the thing that ran everywhere. That you write your code one time, it's going to run everywhere. And while Java was on a lot of different appliances and things, it really never worked out that well. Ended up that JavaScript was the one that kind of ran everywhere, because everything could execute JavaScript. But here we are with this .NET Core, and now you have a statically typed language and this whole rich framework, like the .NET framework, that can run on the smallest of devices all the way up to massive servers. So yeah, it's a good time to be a developer. It's a really good time to be a .NET developer. And if you're just getting into programming, or you're trying to decide what you want to do, where you should focus on, I would suggest you dig into the .NET framework and C#. Really would. So thank you for indulging me as I kind of went down memory lane here to talk about how excited I am about the .NET framework and the changes to it now with the .NET Core and ASP.NET Core and everything goes along with it. And now that Unity itself is using .NET Core underneath the covers, behind the scenes. It's really fantastic. It's good to see how everything's starting to come together here from Microsoft. So it's really fantastic to see. And again, if you're looking into getting into development or been thinking about looking at C# with the .NET framework, now's a fine time to do so. Now, if you like this video, go ahead and feel free to hit that like button. If you didn't like it, go ahead and hit that dislike button. That way I'll know whether these things I should do something like this again or not. If I should steer away from history lessons and just waxing ineloquently on topics such as the .NET framework. So if you liked it, hit that like button. If you didn't like it, go ahead and hit that dislike button. It'll be all right. I'll be okay. And if you like anything around software development in general, especially around the HoloLens, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I release videos every single week. Hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you in the next video.